My name's Angie Pitha. I'm very happy to welcome you today. I'm the project lead of the Election Official Legal Defense Network, EOLDN. And EOLDN is a project of the nonprofit and nonpartisan Center for Election Innovation and Research. CIR was founded in 2016, and we support elections that voters should trust and do trust. CEIR works closely with election officials across the country to determine and promote the best practices of election administration. My project, EOLDN, the Election Official Legal Defense Network, was founded by Bob Bauer, who advised on the Obama campaign, and Ben Ginsberg, who advised on the George W. Bush and the Mitt Romney campaigns. Because in 2021, the two of them, along with our executive director, David Becker, realized that there needed to be a response to the widespread abuse and harassment of election officials. And so EOLDN launched with a service that matches pro bono attorneys with election officials who have been threatened on the job and they seek legal guidance of their own. Along the way, we learned that election officials are facing communication issues like never before due to the high stakes of many elections now and due to the rampant misinformation about election administration. EOLDN offers communications assistance to election administrators. You can learn more about that service by visiting our website, which is eoldn.org. And along the way, we also spotted an opportunity to provide more generally applicable guidance about elections communications. This is the second webinar in a series of 3. The first one was Media Training 101. Many of you joined. We're so glad that you're back. For those of you that didn't make it, it's available to be watched on our YouTube page. But welcome to this one. This is the second webinar in a series of 3. It's how to develop compelling messages for your voters and your constituents and your audiences. The third webinar, sneak preview, some of you already signed up. We encourage all of you to take a look at this one. The third one, the third in the series, the third of 3, will be about crisis communications. That will be held in September. And all of you who have either, anyone who registered, so that includes you, of course, will receive a follow-up email that will have a link to this presentation and then an invitation to register for crisis communications. We'll also drop that invitation link in the chat. So if any of you want to, register right away, you're welcome to do that, but you'll also be receiving the information in your email in a few days. I wanted to first let everyone know before I hand it off to our esteemed speakers that if you have questions for our speakers, and we encourage you to ask them, please drop them into the chat. And let me now turn to our presenters and welcome them. Our presenters for this series are a couple of very important people for EOLDN. They are from the established professional communications firm, which is called CGCN. CGCN is led in part by Matt Rhodes, who was Mitt Romney's 2012 campaign manager. And let me now turn it over to our speakers, Matt Harwig and Tracy Schmidt. Tracy Schmidt, over to you, please.
Great. Thanks so much for framing that and that conversation. And thanks again to everybody who joined the last one. We hope you found it informative and compelling, and we're glad that you're back. But again, if you haven't, we encourage you to take a look at it on the YouTube channel. Today, we spoke last time about kind of the media training, and we're going to kind of take a step back just a little bit and really go to one of the fundamentals of media training, and that's message development. Because the media training obviously is interfacing and interacting and how we kind of deliver those messages, but really developing the right messages and the compelling messages, both factual and compelling in the first place, is completely critical and really the building block of a lot of what you all are going to do in your communications efforts. So we're going to speak a little bit about this today, and then at the end we encourage you to ask questions and feel free to follow up with questions and whatnot. So we can go ahead and get to the first slide. We're going to speak initially to the importance of knowing your audience. Some of that is kind of, it seems obvious. Of course, I know who my audience is, but we'll get a little bit and talk about why it might not be obvious. But the second piece, refining your message and making sure that when you have all that impactful information, how do you get it into a shiny package, but it's also a package that people want to open, right? It's not one that they put away quickly. And meeting people where they are and often. In other words, understanding where you find your audience and making sure that you continue to reach them. So we're just kind of going to go through those pieces. So first off, knowing your audience. Why is that important? When we talk about audience, you would think, well, obviously my audience are, you can go to the next slide. Audience being, the voters or the media through which you're going to communicate with the voters, but it's probably a little bit more specific than that in terms of if you understand where their kind of frame of mind is and where they're coming from. And then kind of looking at it more specifically, who is best going to benefit from this information? Like there's multiple audiences and you can rank them and prioritize them because you're not going to reach everybody. Like I spoke to before, you really kind of need to understand the different language, different frames, different perspectives are going to land differently with different folks and where they're coming from. What's motivating them? Why would they be interested in this information? That will sort of be the key to understanding why they're most interested in this. And another piece of this, where do they get their information? Find them where they are. Don't try and hopscotch and reach, audience A through a channel that that they're never on. So in other words, if you're talking to people that you're trying to reach, millennials or whatnot through social media, that's probably going to be a better way to reach them than through the New Yorker. And these might, a lot of you are dealing with local news, but putting it kind of in those terms. And then how are you going to reach them and what's the action that you want them to take? So understanding that people are bombarded with information on a non-election year in a non-crazy world. So given that everything that's going on, particularly between now and November, like be really concise and direct in terms of what action you would like them to take, if any, or if it is just an awareness piece and you're trying to inform and educate them. And I think that's something that, again, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but it's really critical when you have a small snapshot of folks' attention. In the next slide, please. So getting that message right and really kind of honing in on that. And you can go to the next one. Like, don't you find this disturbing? Well, I only glanced at it. There is, out of probably every dozen folks, there's the person that will deep dive and read the article, but most of us, myself included, people don't necessarily, unless it's something that directly they know correlates to them, or if they're going to have enough money to feed their family or pay their mortgage bill, they're not going to dive and read the whole article. So understanding that people really are going to glance at things, why it's important, and we talked to this about media training, not to kind of bury the lead, making sure that you're communicating in a way that grabs their attention, but also gets them the information they need in a time span in which they're going to absorb it. This is always a little bit of a dance, what you want to say and what they're interested in, and do those even overlap? And if they do, kind of finding that sweet spot and melding them two together. A lot of, whether or not the election is, people safe and secure and how they can vote, people make, oh, I'll get to that in November. I'll worry about that later. That's really not really top of mind now. I'm just starting to pay attention to the candidates in the election, but you want to really kind of get some of that information out there and do it, with the cadence, and doing that sooner than later, we know is important, and it's proven that will have a better result for you. So making sure that even if the information isn't necessarily something that they're dying to hear about, you're putting it in a way and you're kind of finding that overlap where you can get them to absorb what they need to hear and what you want them to hear and what they may or may not be interested in. So what do they need to hear? I spoke to this before. They're busy, get to the point, grab their attention, understand that you're probably not going to get the entire news report. Well, first off, when you're dealing with the media, you're only going to get like a soundbite or a quote in. But even beyond that, they're not going to watch the entire piece. So trying to get your information at the top, trying to get it packaged in the way that we know is going to, tell them what they need to know in a quick, concise manner, 3 to 5 kind of points at best. Like it's actually scientifically proven people kind of doze off after more than 5 points. And I tend to think, particularly when you're developing a message that's going to be conveyed through the media, I would just choose a few points, because if you choose 5, you give the media the opportunity to select what they think is actually the most important. So something that is concise, not only readable, but digestible in terms they understand, and that they can relate to. And then you can be repetitive with those, because really and we were going to have the kind of be repetitive out there a couple of times, because it's very, it's very important that people hear things not just once, but they hear it multiple times, and they hear it from maybe different voices, which they've identified as credible. And we'll speak a little bit, more to that and some of that, because that comes out in a crisis as well as proactive. And in terms of kind of being clear on your message and getting out those core messages, I'm going to let Matt Hartwig, my friend on the other side of the aisle, speak to this piece.
Well, thanks, Tracy. For those of you who joined us at the previous training, we talked a lot about being clear, being concise. But when you're developing the core messages that you're going to use, regardless of channel, it's got to be the information that you need your audiences to hear, right? There may be a lot of information you have, and it's all very good, and the facts are important, but you're going to lose their attention span, and you're going to end up talking past them if you don't get them the information they need to hear. For example, do they need to know that the ballot is going to be changing when they go to vote? And if so, what actions do they need to take before they go? Are polling places changing, right? Are dates when vote by mail might be happening? Those are important things that they need to hear. They don't need to know maybe the reasons why, or maybe if you have more time, you can delve into those. They need the relevant information up front. When you're speaking to that group or speaking to the media to reach that audience, you should develop your messages that have facts to support them. I would keep it at 2 to 3, right? Something that you can easily remember, and so can they, when and if you get the opportunity to go deeper. And make these core messages adaptable, right? When you're speaking to an NPR, for example, you'll have more time to speak, to answer the questions, to share your point of view. If you're going to push this out on social, you're going to have just a few seconds. Your message has to be something that can be tailored to meet the medium and also to reach the audience. Maggie, if you want to move to the next slide. And that's where be concise comes in. You have to lead. I know it sounds repetitive, and we'll get to, and I'll repeat that in a little bit. But lead with your most important ideal. It's that inverted pyramid that we shared in the last training, where what is it? If there's one thing that your audiences have to know, make sure that you lead with that. If it's an action, make sure you are clear what you need them to do. Do they need to have a plan to vote? Is it going to take them longer, so they need to bring in their sample ballot? Did something change with how they should register to vote? Those things need to be very clear, easily understood, and then do so in as few words as possible, right? Use those action verbs. Don't use 5 words when 3 will do. Don't use a $1 word when a nickel word will do. Keep it simple so that people, when they hear it, we talked about being repetitive, when they hear it over and over again, it's something that they can easily remember. And when it comes time for them to take the action you want, they'll remember that. Tracy talked a little bit about being relevant, about connecting your message to the day-to-day lives of the voters and avoiding jargon and fancy words. I'll give the example of a ballot being different this time around than it was in 2020, right? If there's something you need to do, or it's going to take them, for instance, maybe the process is going to take them longer if they want to vote in person. You need to craft the message around that ties into their busy lives, so that they feel like you understand the challenges that they face to carve out the time to vote, that they think it's important to vote, and that you're arming them with the tools to do so effectively. An example of trying to be relevant. The other thing another approach you could take is try to tie it maybe to a relative, an event that's happening, right? We've done work before where it was around, there was an important date that was going to be around April Fools, right? So, we worked on materials that said, no joke, you need to register to vote by this date, right? Trying to make it something that people can relate to, are willing to either click on or dive deeper for more information.
And one thing I would add, if they're ever having to Google an acronym, that you're losing, right? So there'll be acronyms that you will second nature, but nobody's got time to kind of learn what your language means.
And then to beat this dead horse yet again, be repetitive. Think of the rule of seven, and there's some science behind it. When brands want consumers to take an action, they find that they've got to interact with that message, with that call to action 7 times before it sinks in, and they'll move and act the way the brand wants. You are a brand. You need the voters to take an action. They need to hear from you. You need to think about channel diversity. You need to think about which messages you want to drive home. But you do need to repeat yourself and say the same thing over and over and over. Perhaps this is more so or more true with voters maybe than any other block, because as we know, a lot of them won't maybe start paying attention until after Labor Day. Even worse, some wait till the week or two before the election to try to figure out where their polling places are, what the ballot looks like. Are they going to vote in person? Do they want to vote early? It's kind of a late deciding bunch in many respects. And so making sure that you've built in the time to deliver messages 7 times to these people and these audiences is very important. So we talked about channels, and I'll move through this relatively quickly because we do want to hear about your questions. But channel is important because, as you can see here, and this is just showing you, I think, what everybody knows, Americans live primarily digitally, right? They get their news from digital news sources. They're on social media. And so while ignoring traditional television, print opportunities, we're not recommending that. But if you only have a certain amount of resources, you need to make sure that you're allocating your resources and your message delivery to these channels, and make sure that your messages are tailored to reach this audience, right? I'll give you an example of kind of how this works. Some of you might be familiar with Axios, and Axios has a very distinct style in how they report their stories and their news, right? And they give you the headline, and then they tell you why it matters, right? It makes it easy to digest. It makes it easy to share. And thinking in terms of how you can structure your message and how you deliver it in a way that allows people to say, oh, there's the headline, right? The attention spans shrink. If they're inclined, the next thing down is, why is this important to them? Right. So, voting may take longer in the fall. Why does that, or ballot is changing in the fall. Why does that matter? Well, it may mean it may take you more time in the polls, in the polling booth. Keeping those things in mind as you choose your audiences and you find out where they like to get their information is important. Next slide, please. And here, we won't drain the slide here, but these are for your reference down the road. As you think about each of these channels, they do have a style where messages are most effectively delivered. The one that we probably haven't spoken about a lot is the owned channel on the far right, right? This is your website. These are your assets where you can provide a bit more information, right? You spent all this time developing a key message document with really important proof points. Your own channels, the websites, perhaps you buy an advertorial, on an online publication. This is where you can go a little bit deeper and provide all of the information that people need. It also gives you the opportunity when you're doing some of these shorter form message deliveries, like on social media, it gives you something where you can put a link, and those people who do want more information can click through there and go over to your sites where you have thoughtfully crafted this message and provided them the information that they need to know. And so breaking through, this is just sort of a quick look at a life cycle of developing your messaging and get it through, right? Who do you need to talk to? What do they need to hear? What action do you need to take? Where are they going to be? How do you get the information you need to get to them quickly and in a way that they can understand, and where they're likely to consume it? And then you do it over and over and over and over again, in the hopes that come election day, all of your work pays off. Your voters are confident in the process. They're confident in what they need to know. they're confident when they step into the booth that they're prepared to cast their ballot. And then the last slide before we turn it over and hear from you guys on questions you might have, you are not alone. You have to think about your audiences and your messages, right? Only you will know that, especially, if you're in a smaller county, you may want to spend some time talking to some of the folks in the community and hearing from them. I know many of you don't have the budgets to do polling and research and message development and see what resonates. So a lot of this is based upon your read and your understanding of your own communities, but you are not alone. Here is just 4 examples of resources available to you. Certainly Tracy and I, working with Angie, can help you all, but just know that you're not alone, and there are some things out there that can help you get the jump start on crafting messages to reach your audiences. And before we turn it over to Q&A, Tracy, anything else?
No, that was great. The one thing I wanted to add is kind of, you were talking about the different channels and, certain ways that you're going to work through a broadcast channel or a print in terms of, keeping it succinct. Also thinking about that the audiences inherently, sometimes you will know a certain audience is going to be drawn to a certain channel if it's a more conservative media outlet or something that's investigative or, a little more left of center. So thinking about the message that way, if they're going to be more skeptical to even like the most basic things to be true, you may want to front load it with some more kind of facts and data versus, a different audience that may take to a more kind of artful, creative, compelling approach. So just think about that in terms of understanding, unfortunately, these inherent biases that different audience members will have. And that, the kind of really unfortunate events of last weekend, I think reminded everybody how much tone matters. That's kind of a frame, we didn't talk about with this, but kind of stepping back and thinking like, is this the right tone? And I think that's something we can all kind of look inwards in our gut on.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Just a reminder, if you have any questions that you'd like the speakers to address, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box. One question that we've gotten already is, will the resources be linked? And the answer to that is yes. We will make sure that you get those in the email that we send out. And you'll also be able to get that on the YouTube video, because we'll post the resources with the video when it's all done. So any other questions? Type them in the Q&A box. First question is, how can I tell if my message is resonating?
That's a great question. And again, I think it goes back to the conversation about budgets, right? You can't poll and test to see how a message is doing, and in many cases, so some of it will be anecdotal. When you're out in the community, are you hearing from people? Are they asking questions? Do they seem engaged? You may see it with an increase and traffic to your website, or calls or emails or questions into your office about what's happening, indicating that maybe people are seeing what's going on and want some more information. I think ultimately the final measurement to determine whether or not all of the work that you put in to educate the voter on how they need to vote and what they need to do ahead of this election will come post-election, when you look at the turnout and how many people showed up to vote, completed the ballot, turned it in the right way. It really will come, in the days following the election, unfortunately. So that's why putting the work in up front to know your audiences, understand what they need to hear, being clear on what you need them to do is so very important, as is making sure you tell them over and over and over and over again.
Anything to add, Tracy? You're good.
No, I just saw that next question pop up. I don't know if you wanted to read it,
Yep.
Maggie.
All right. So, the next question, how do I know my target audience is getting the message?
Part of that is sort of research in advance, right? And we shared some of those tools. Those are research done by Pew on where certain age groups reside, right? I think we all know if you're trying to communicate to college students and get them excited to, vote or engage in the process or be a poll watcher. You may not be going to NPR or radio. You may not even be going to TV. You're likely going to be living on social media channels, using video content and other imagery that engages with them more. Whereas perhaps an older audience is used to looking at newspapers, watching TV. So I think part of it is really about determining what you need them to hear, and then engineering the channels, engineering the audiences and the channels best to reach them. Again, I think part of the indications that it's working are anecdotal as we lead up to the election. Perhaps you see an increase, I'll use the example of college students and, encouraging them to get involved in working in the election process. Do you see an uptick in volunteerism on their part? But again, it will be kind of after election day, or leading up to election day and the days after, where you see what the turnout looks like and voter behavior. You'll have a good sense then whether or not your message resonated. Again, I'd also note too, the resources that are out there are there to kind of give you a place to start, because some of that research has been done, right? It's a broader swath, more nationalized data in many cases. So you'll need to localize it, but some of that work has already been done. And then I heard a term that I had not heard before called RND, Angie. I believe that's what they said: rob and duplicate. Meaning, if you see other election officials doing something that, or with a message that you think would resonate, reach out to them, borrow it, use it and put your own spin on it. There's no shame in that game. I think everyone working together to make sure that all of the elections, regardless of where they're occurring, are done well, and that you feel like voters have the information is the ultimate goal here. So your own colleagues may be another good resource for you as well.
Yeah, I see a question in the chat from, is it better to preempt a story or let it play out and answer after? And I assume the question is about a reporter inquiry and an opportunity for a response. Is it better to have your place in the story or wait and then respond after the fact? I would say in 9 times out of 10, maybe 9.5 times out of 10, you want to respond. That is your opportunity to not only potentially help shape the story, but to, it's not everybody, you may not get a chance to reach the same readers again. They may glance through something. They're certainly not going to be, combing the websites for letters to the editor or, something on you put out as a response to a story on a press release. But that is, I feel like it's, and a lot of people may sometimes shy away from this, and it doesn't mean that you need to be glib or, quick or flippant to respond. I think it's really important to craft that response that is accurate, that is going to, that is kind of probably the best statement to make by your stakeholders and, certain other things in the environment. So I think that should be a very thoughtful exercise, but it's absolutely, I think, important to respond because you tend to just they assume negative or guilty or defensive, that you're coming out kind of after the fact to respond, or that you couldn't get your act together, or it wasn't important enough to you to answer and reach that audience. So Matt may have, additional thought to this, but I feel like it's pretty important. It doesn't mean you may not have to, after the story is run, continue to set the record straight. Unfortunately, we're sort of living that era, and reporters are working fast and under deadline. And some of this we this question actually could have its own webinar, but I do think, again, it's important to use that opportunity to get your message out there and to get the facts out there.
Yep. And I agree with all of that. And I would also note, in the previous training, we talked about being early in terms of engaging with media. Once you have your messages defined and you know what you want to say on kind of the core issues, right? Something may pop up, and we'll cover crisis comms in the next webinar. So may pop and useful for you should feel confident and comfortable engaging with the media ahead of time, sharing these points of view and these messages. So when a story does come, not only will they come to you, but they will come more informed, and the questions will be better rather than how do you so and so said this, how do you respond?
We've got a few questions about social media and, perhaps what channels on social media to use, or is it possible to overpost on social media? Could you talk sort of broadly about using social media as a tactic for communicating your message?
Yeah, I think it's probably not, I think it used a long time ago, it was a nice to do, and now it's a must do, because that's meeting the audience where they are. And unfortunately, a lot of the audience in the country is on their phones all the time scrolling. So there's really not necessarily an option there, but understanding that you may have a different audience. You'll likely have a different audience on Facebook than you will have on Instagram, than you will have on LinkedIn, or at least they're going on there for different reasons, right? So I do think that's critical, and it needs to though understand that you're then kind of opening the kimono, and you're probably likely going to have, especially on Facebook. And this is maybe a way to know if you're reaching, if the message is working, you're going to have responses, and you may be like poking the bear in terms of how sensitive the issue is, because you're going to have comments on there. And you may, speaking of, this is like plays to the tone kind of matters, but understanding that it's somewhere that for whatever reason, a lot of people, no holds barred, like to get fired up, but it's absolutely a tool to reach your audience. People don't necessarily go to websites these days, and a lot of them are just getting their news from social media.
Right. And I would add to that too, it can be a programmable channel for you to share a message, right? You've developed these messages. You can set a calendar to share, if it's related to mail-in voting, right? Or early voting, or
Oh, I don't know if we lost
Matt,
Matt, you're breaking up. I
Yeah.
suggest maybe just taking a second, maybe letting Tracy comment on the current question or moving on to another one, and give you a minute.
All right, I think he stopped. No, social media, like what Matt said, let's just put it on social media, but understand that it is absolutely a can of worms, for better or for worse, right? But it's a necessary can of worms. I don't know if we can mute Matt. He said,
no. Super.
Okay.
Mute him.
program plan. I would just encourage you to just not think about
Okay. Matt, we're going to mute you because you are breaking up. Oh, it looks like he left us. Okay. All right.
All right, sorry.
All right, Tracy, here you go. It's the Tracy show now. All right. So,
Previous.
sort of following up on the social media question, we had a question about disinformation and misinformation on what are the best practices in terms of crafting this messages to dispel misinformation? Should we directly dispel the piece of disinformation, or should the message make more use of indirect methods?
I think I hate to say it's case by case, but I think it's a little bit of both, right? So in terms of what you all know are the kind of tried and true compelling pieces of message to be out there beating the drum, not just kind of in response, and not like, a couple one-off posts like leading into the end of October, but in terms of the election being safe and secure, and the steps that you have all taken within your kind of jurisdiction. So folks understand that they should have that trust of the system. I think that's really important, to be creating that surround sound around that. So it's not just coming maybe from your own media and your website. If there's ways that you can kind of engage others, third parties, or key trusted voices in the community to be making those points, I think that's important in terms of dispelling disinformation. Some of those pieces, I think you absolutely should take them head on. So I'm sort of giving two answers here, but I think if you've got the facts to push back on something, absolutely. And I would think sooner is obviously better than later, because once something is out there that is inaccurate, it's likely going to be repeated and shared by your detractors who are just looking for these nuggets that they can then maybe even like take and run an ad with, right? Or use it as a reason for people to like stay home. So making sure that you can take that on kind of swiftly and directly, I think is really important, but also layering that with having that broader kind of safety trust message out there. I hope that answers the question.
All right. We have another election official that said they're on the cusp of communicating directly with voters through a program like Constant Contact or an email program. Are there any initial recommendations you have about using an application? Like how often should you reach out?
I think it kind of depends on you. If you really inundate people on something like that, they're going to either like unsubscribe or look at it as spam or shut you out. But to the extent you can maybe be positioning yourself to be a credible, useful voice and deliver information that they want and that they find useful, you're then more likely to have their attention and have them, you know, see a little alert or whatnot pop up and want to see what you have to say. So I think it's a little bit of an art more than a science. I mean, some of this I think is there's going to be some audiences and some areas, and sometimes when different things are going on in the news cycle, people are going to be more receptive than others. You also don't want to bombard people when they may not even be thinking about this. But again, I think usually people have an opt out of those services and you just don't want to like incite them to use it too quickly. So I think it's a little bit of a dance.
All right, just a reminder, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A box. Next question, how can I avoid negative responses to my message?
Move, no, leave it, move to another planet. No, I'm kidding. You can't, and that's you know, that's part of it, right? And I think that's how you react though to those negative responses, because look, we're a very kind of closely divided country, even on things that didn't spark division before. It's just become that way, and I would argue social media kind of has been part of that. But that's a different webinar. I think what's important though is having a respectful counter response, or not sending the message even inadvertently that you are trying to tamp down or, you know, counter or, you know, muzzle anybody that disagrees with you, and that you respect sort of all positions, but, you know, here are our thoughts and here are the facts, and so be it. But no, you can't necessarily counter a negative response. And then this goes back to tone, especially if your messaging is kind of written in a way that's respectful and fact driven. I would add that, like if you're coming out swinging and, you know, scorched earth, you're absolutely more likely to invoke a negative response.
Okay. So budgets are tight. How can I ensure the message gets out?
I think this is where earned media comes into play, and social media. So this doesn't necessarily need to be a paid advertising, you know, blitz, but you can, whether or not you have the money to make sure that your posts are boosted or amplified or whatnot. And some of that actually is a lot less expensive than folks would think. Making sure that you're at least making an effort to be out there and get the message out there and be speaking to reporters and finding creative ways to make yourself available to different audiences and different channels within your community would be my recommendation. And look, writing an op-ed for your local paper doesn't take anything other than time. So.
Okay, I think that answers the questions we've gotten in the Q&A. Matt or Tracy, do you have any closing remarks, or otherwise we'll kick it back over to Angie?
Matt, if you want to give it a shot,
Yeah, are you there, Matt?
That'd be lovely to see you again.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, maybe the video was overloading the feed. I apologize. I seem to be cursed with gremlins whenever we're doing these webinars. I will endeavor to have a cleaner performance at the next one. No, this was great. I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to share, and you know, you all know how to get in touch with Angie, and she can get in touch with us if there's anything we can do to help. We appreciate and respect all the things that you guys do.
Yeah, we know it's rough out there. So thank you for all of your service to democracy with the risk of sounding, but we mean it. It's really. So.
Well, of course, I joined Tracy and Matt just to say that we are so happy to have your ear for a few minutes, just to talk to you about these problems that are facing you. And it's also nice just to kind of look at these very bedrock principles of how to develop a message. When we were first talking about what we might cover in this series, it occurred to me that just a straight message development piece might be perhaps the first sort of formal, thoughtful training that many of us have ever received. And yet we get thrown into our jobs and it's sort of like, tell them the right thing and do it correctly and do it right away. And I just think going back to these like very bedrock concepts is a great use of everyone's time, no matter whether you're an EO or just other things that we're trying to achieve in our work lives. So all of us benefit from this information. And thank you again for everyone for joining us. As you can see, we have the link to the third and final webinar about crisis communications. It's in the chat. So we encourage you to click that and register, but it can certainly wait for later because you will be receiving, along with a recording of this presentation and the resources that we refer to inside of it, the link to this registration as well. So you'll be getting a nice bundle of information as a follow-up in a few days. And thank you everyone again, especially to our presenters, Tracy and Matt, and to Maggie for helping us run the show today. Thank you all. See you next time. Bye-bye.